Good morning, all. I got to turn myself on. Well, here we are. It is a delight to see all of you here today. I hope you're glad you're here. I'm glad you're here. If we haven't met in the past, my name is Chris Stinnett. You really don't need to remember that for long. You do need to know my wife, Connie. I always introduce her as the brains of the outfit. And you know that if you've known me for any length of time at all. If you want to get a head start, you can go ahead and turn to Mark chapter 5. We're delighted to be here on Friend and Family Day. I don't know if we're friends or family, but either way, we're glad we're here. And we're glad you're here too. Now, for those of you who have heard me speak in the past, I got to tell you, this is all new today. I'm not going to tell the same jokes and same stories that I have in the past, okay? Because all preachers know this. All preachers know that people will forget the sermon, and they'll forget the scriptures, and they'll forget the main points of your brilliant outline, but they will never forget the illustrations and stories that you tell. Stories communicate. People remember those things forever. And there's a reason for that. You know, these things communicate very powerfully to us. We all like a good story. We spent our time in the morning Bible class this morning talking about the stories in the Bible and how they reveal the character of God to us. And these are true stories that he tells us. We need to keep in mind these stories are reality here. So you too will have the opportunity to tell the character of God by telling your story of faith in him. We're going to talk about that. Everybody has an interesting story to tell. Now, when I say that, everybody has an interesting story to tell, my guess is that 90% of the people sitting in this room are thinking, not me, my story is dull. I don't really have a... But that's not true, and I'm going to demonstrate that to you pretty quickly. When Connie and I were newly married, that was so long ago, the whole world was in black and white back then. Color wasn't invented till we'd been married 5 years. Anyway, we had a surprise dinner. It's a long story concerning the congregation we were at. We had a surprise dinner. We were told that we would have 3 guests for dinner. We had no idea who they were until they showed up. So one was an elder and his wife. We knew them pretty well. The third one, though, was a woman named Tracy. And she was an introvert of introverts. I mean, she was the sort of a person who would get lost in a crowd of 2. Okay? You wouldn't be able to find her. Her job was taking money in a toll booth in an underground parking garage. I can't think of anything more isolated than that, okay? All by herself, all day long, day after day. She was just one of these, you know, I'm not trying to be unkind, she was just kind of a colorless person. And we had no idea what we're going to talk about with Tracy. And after she came in and got settled and we started eating and things were going along pretty well, she started telling us about a mission trip that she had taken to Europe. And that was such an exotic idea to us. Wow, we never even considered that such a thing was possible. And she had wonderful stories to tell about her time in Europe and the mission trip that she was on. And that was the time when I began to realize that everybody has an interesting story to tell if you will just take the time to listen. They have interesting stories to tell. And that means you do too. And I'm going to show you some things I think from the scriptures today may help you to tell your story of faith, because you have a powerful story to tell about God's grace to you in Jesus Christ. And let's go to a different story. We're going to go to Mark chapter 5, verses 1 through 20. I talked to Steve about this, and I know he's been working through Mark, so you've already seen this in the past, but I want to go back to this same story. It should be fairly familiar to you about this demon-possessed man in Mark chapter 5. So we're going to start in verse 1. We're going to read the whole story. The whole story? Yeah, we're going to read the whole story. But we'll take it slowly, and I've got a few things that I want to say on the way by. So let's just get started here in Mark chapter 5. There's a lot of detail in this story. It's very vivid. Mark wasn't there, but I suspect I suspect that Mark heard Peter preach this story over and over and over and over. So, as we get started in this story, my guess is it's springtime, and it is just a guess, but my guess is it's springtime. There had been a storm the night before that Jesus calmed. That's pretty exciting. Jesus calmed that storm. So we're going to start here in verse 1. They went across the lake to the region of the Gerasenes. Now this is, here, can you see the map here? I'll put the map up here in front so you can see it. Okay, so here's the Sea of Galilee, and they're going to cross over to, yeah, I've got it turned right. So you're looking at the southwest edge here. That's where the Decapolis region, or the 10 cities region, would be, and that's where they went. They went across to the region of the Gerasenes. When Jesus got out of the boat, a man with an evil spirit came from the tombs to meet him. This man, hold on a second. So we get to the Decapolis region, it's mostly Gentile. There is no dock, there is no pier. You just beach the boat wherever you can and jump out, because that's the way it works. That picture, by the way, if you're curious, that actually is the Sea of Galilee. And you just beach the boat there and get out of the boat wherever you can. And then here comes this character who is completely out of control. And I want you to think for just a moment, if you just got through this and you get out on dry land and this out of control character comes screaming and storming toward you, what would you do? I get back in the boat. They didn't. They didn't get back in the boat. Start with me in verse 3. This man lived in the tombs. He's perpetually unclean. He's perpetually outside of town, because tombs were always out of the city. Get the dead people outside the city. This man lived in the tombs, and no one could bind him anymore, not even with a chain, for he had often been chained hand and foot. But he tore the chains apart, broke the irons on his feet. No one was strong enough to subdue him. Night and day among the tombs and in the hills he would cry out and cut himself with stones. What do you do for people who are just completely out of control? Well, until very recent human history, the only answer was to confine them somehow. Keep them from hurting themselves, keep them from hurting other people, and if that meant chains and shackles, that's what you do. Sometimes put them in prison, sometimes confine them to a single room in the home if you have enough money to do that. But you just got to somehow get these people under control, because they can't control themselves. And this guy can't be controlled at all. He's out here, and the chains and the shackles are not helping in any way. In this case, there is nothing of human ingenuity that is going to help this guy. They can't chain him, they can't shackle him, they can't confine him. Nothing is helping this guy, because his problem is spiritual in every sense of the word. And so in verse 6, he runs to Jesus. When he saw Jesus from a distance, he ran and fell on his knees in front of him. He shouted at the top of his voice, "What do you want with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? Swear to God that you won't torture me." For Jesus had said to him, "Come out of this man, you evil spirit." Then Jesus asked him, "What is your name?" "My name is Legion," he replied, "for we are many." And he begged Jesus again and again not to send them out of the area. So he fell on his knees, screaming not to be tortured. That's interesting, isn't it? Not to be tortured, not to be sent away. And that brings us to the very first lesson that I think we can draw from this, and that is that everybody has a backstory. Everybody has a backstory. You do, I do. Everybody has a backstory. Whatever we were in the years BC, before Christ, we all have a backstory. And it may be a very dramatic backstory. We were talking in Bible class briefly about Paul's conversion story. You know, we get that story 3 times in the book of Acts. Luke tells it first in chapter 9, and then Paul tells it twice in chapter 22 and then again in 26. But that's not the end of that story, because Paul continues to tell his story over and over. We get it in Galatians and we get it in Timothy. He loves it. We get it in 1 Corinthians. Paul loves to tell his story because it's a story of the faith that he has in Jesus. And then he talked about his faith experiences everywhere where he preached and taught and the things that he endured for Christ. He talked about where he went and what he did and how God protected him and all that. Paul had some dramatic stories to tell. You think about the Philippian jailer in Acts chapter 16. You all may know that story. So Paul and Silas are beaten, thrown into prison, earthquake, near-death experience. That is considered a dramatic story, okay? That earthquake and near-death experience. That'd be pretty dramatic. And there are dramatic stories of conversion. You may know some dramatic stories. This guy certainly has a dramatic backstory. But we've known people in our lives, you probably have too, led very dysfunctional lives. Some of them did terrible things in their lives and then came to faith in Christ. And they have a dramatic story to tell. Sometimes it's very dramatic. Sometimes it's not dramatic at all. One guy called this a slow drip kind of faith that we have. Some people grow up in the church. Let's do a quick poll. If you're willing to admit this, how many of you grew up in the church? That is wonderful. That is wonderful. What that means is you had influence in your life for year after year after year after year, this slow drip of reality and faith that came to you. You know, we've got a really good example of a guy like that in the scriptures. His name was Timothy. Oh, his father was a Greek, but he learned about God from Grandma Eunice and from Lois, his mama. And he just grew up knowing about God. So when Paul showed up and Barnabas showed up with the gospel message, he was in a position where he could hear and obey the truth because this slow drip had gone into his heart and into his mind. Well, yours may be a dramatic story. It may not be dramatic. Maybe something in between. I don't know. Did you ever wonder how Barnabas came to faith? We don't really know. He just shows up. Barnabas, a Levite, man of great faith. We meet up with him in the book of Acts. He's already a Christian when we meet him. What about those priests? You know, in Acts chapter 6 and verse 7, there's a kind of just a throwaway comment that Luke makes on his way by. And he says, a great number of priests became obedient to the faith. How'd they do that? I don't know, something between the dramatic and the slow drip, somewhere in the middle of that. Some little while ago, Connie and I in our travels were in Neosho, Missouri. And we went to the church there, and they had a visiting Ukrainian preacher there. He's partly supported by them, so he came to talk to them. And fascinating guy. His name is Sasha. And he started talking about his obedience to the gospel because he didn't grow up hearing anything about God, of course. So he learned about God and obeyed the gospel. And Sasha said something in his presentation that really kind of resonated with me because he said, I wasn't a bad guy. I just had my own plan for my life. None of it included God. He said, I wasn't a bad guy. He wasn't a thug, wasn't a liar, bank robber, or anything like that. I just had my own plan for my life. That's an important statement because that's his story. You don't want to forget your story. You got to remember, everybody has an interesting story to tell, and you need to think about how you could tell your story of coming to faith. Just say it in a couple of sentences. You don't have to give the big whole biography thing. Just say it in a couple of sentences how you came to faith in Jesus. And remember, it's not a story about you. It's a story about God's grace to you. That's going to become even more apparent as we move through this story. I want to remind you of a passage in Deuteronomy chapter 6. A very famous passage. It's called the Shema. Because in Hebrew it starts Shema. Hear, O Israel. Okay, it goes like this. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength. Everybody knows, or most people have heard that. If you skip a little further down in that same chapter, though, God goes on to say through Moses, he says, when you come into this promised land and you live in houses you didn't build, and you harvest fields you didn't plant, and you take care of olive orchards and groves that you didn't tend, don't forget. You didn't do this, but God brought you here and put you in this position. Don't forget, don't forget. But they did forget. And that's the source of almost all of Israel's troubles after that, was that they forgot what God had done for them. It's really easy for us to rewrite our story in our memory so that we're not the bad guy, we're the good guy. I was talking to Steve about this a couple of evenings ago, and he had some very good insights about memory and how memory works and why we rewrite our stories in our minds to protect ourselves from being the bad guy, to cover up our shame. Don't do that. See, the people of Christ are people of truth. And we have to tell the truth, even if it's a little bit painful to tell the truth. Because the reality is we all have a backstory. We've all got a backstory. Let's get back to this story, shall we? Don't forget your backstory. Learn how to tell it. Let's get back to this story. Go with me to verse 11. A large herd of pigs was feeding on the nearby hillside. The demons begged Jesus, "Send us among the pigs. Allow us to go into them." He gave them permission. Okay, who's in charge here? Well, it sounds like Jesus is in charge if he's giving permission, okay? He gave them permission, and the evil spirits came out and went into the pigs. The herd, about 2,000 in number, rushed down the steep bank into the lake and were drowned. This man is utterly hopeless. His life is never going to get better. And yet, Jesus clearly has all authority here and permitted the demons to leave the man and enter the pigs. The problem is that even the pigs know it's better to be dead than be infested with a demon. They'd rather be dead. And so they ran down the bank and drowned themselves. In verse 14 it says, those tending the pigs ran off and reported this in the town and countryside. People went out to see what had happened. When they came to Jesus, they saw the man who had been possessed by the legion of demons sitting there dressed in his right mind. They were afraid. Those who had seen it told the people what had happened to the demon-possessed man and told about the pigs as well. And then the people began to plead with Jesus to leave their region. You know, it's too bad, but some people care more about their goods than they do about their lives. That's a different sermon. I'm not going to preach that, unless you want it. Put that one down? Okay, well, we'll put that on hold. We'll come back to it another time. Some people do care more about their goods than they care about their lives. But now, for the first time in a long time, this man has a life. Do you remember that in John chapter 10 and verse 10, Jesus said, the thief comes only to steal and to kill and destroy. I came that they may have life and have it more abundantly. Finally, this guy has a life. It's been a long time since he had a life. But here we wind up with the second lesson about telling your story. First lesson, everybody's got a backstory. Don't forget it. Learn how to tell it in a sentence or two. The second lesson is this: Jesus has changed our lives, and he has restored joy and hope and purpose. You know, it's pretty undeniable, I think, that the whole world today lives in fear and hatred and anger like these people did. You don't have to look very far before you see evidence of the fear and the hatred and the anger. See, that's what happens. That's what you get when you have no hope, no gratitude, no purpose. The whole universe has somehow been unfair to you. But Jesus has given us a true future. We have a real future, and He's given us a right mind. You want to look at your life. Look at your life and ask yourself this question. What would I be today without Jesus? What would my life be without Jesus? I have done that for myself, and I want to tell you something. It ain't pretty. I know myself, and I know my family. I know the influences in my background, and if it weren't for Jesus, we wouldn't be here. The world, for some reason, the world wants the fruit of the Spirit. You know, the fruit of the Spirit: love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. The world wants all of that. They don't want the Spirit. They want the fruit of the Spirit, but they don't want the Spirit. I've been reading a book by Philip Yancey, one of my favorite religious writers. He was talking about the clandestine church in China. There are millions and millions and millions of believers in China who have just the slightest contact with the gospel of Jesus. And they have a lot of internal problems. But the thing is, the communist Chinese government has a love-hate relationship with Christians. They hate it that the Christians don't give full loyalty and allegiance to the Chinese Communist Party. They demand that of all their citizens, and the Christians won't do that. They hate that about them. But here's what they love. They love the fact that these Christians tell the truth, are people of integrity, pay their bills, pay their taxes, they're good neighbors. All the whole orderly social structure these Christians adopt, and the government loves that. So they really don't know what to do with these people. They're in a quandary about how to deal with these folks. Because they want everything that Christ brings to us, but they don't want Christ. It ain't gonna happen. It's just not gonna be that way. Again, I think you need to look at how Jesus has changed your life. Think about what Jesus has done in you. How can you have purpose? How can you have hope? How can you have joy? How can you have peace in this world? Well, it's only through Jesus. But, you know, that's not the end of this guy's story, so we want to finish this up. Aren't you glad there's an end? Let's go back to verse 18. So the first lesson in this story is we all got a backstory. Yeah, we sure do. Second lesson is you need to remember what Jesus has done for you. He's changed your life. Jesus has changed your life. Don't forget that. Let's start in verse 18. We'll wind this up at verse 20. As Jesus was getting into the boat, as the people begged him to go away, hard on the livestock market, go away. Jesus was getting into the boat, the man who had been demon-possessed begged to go with him. Jesus did not let him, but said, "Go home to your family and tell them how much the Lord has done for you and how he has had mercy on you." So the man went away and began to tell in the Decapolis, that's that 10-town region. Man went away and began to tell in the Decapolis how much Jesus had done for him, and all the people were amazed. So here's the third lesson. You know, we always want to stay on the mountaintop, don't we? When we're having a real good day and a real good time, we always want to stay on the mountaintop. But Jesus is not content for the man to stay on the mountaintop. He wants him to go home and be a person. Go home and be a person. Really, honestly. So the guy does. He goes home and glorifies God. You know how to glorify God? You just make him known. He is glorious. You just make him known. So he goes home and he glorifies God. And the people are amazed. And that brings us to the third lesson that I want to point out to you. And that is this. When you tell what Jesus has done for you, you ignite hope and a deep desire to know him. All you have to do is tell what Jesus has done for you and how he has had mercy on you. I want to show you how this works because it's all connected to this story here. Go back to verse 17. Right, verse 17, chapter 5. Then the people began to plead with Jesus to leave their region, get him out of here. All right, now hold a finger there and flip over to chapter 7. Mark chapter 7, verse 31 and 32. Just a couple of pages over. It says, Then Jesus left the vicinity of Tyre, went through Sidon, down to the Sea of Galilee, and into the region of the Decapolis. That's where we were in chapter 5 when all this happened. He's in the region of the Decapolis. There, some people brought to him a man who was deaf and could hardly talk, and they begged him to place his hand on the man. Now wait a minute. Well, no, skip on down to the end of that. Verse 36, he went ahead and healed the man, okay? But verse 36, Jesus commanded them not to tell anyone, but the more he did so, the more they kept talking about it. People were overwhelmed with amazement. He's done everything well, they said. He even makes the deaf hear and the mute speak. So the first time Jesus is there, they're begging him, get out of here. And the second time he shows up, they can't get enough of him. What happened? What happened from chapter 5 to chapter 7? I think what happened was the man from chapter 5 kept talking about Jesus and how he had had mercy on him. What is it that will give people lives free from the evil influence of fear and hatred and anger and pointlessness? What is it that'll fill people with the spirit of love and joy and peace and patience and kindness and all the rest of it? What will change our lives? Obviously, Jesus does that. And he has always invited people to freedom. Do you remember Matthew 11, verse 28 to 30, where Jesus says, Come unto me. Come to me, all you who labor and are heavy laden. I'll give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me. I'm gentle, humble in heart. You'll find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy. My burden is light. Jesus always invites us to come to him. Now, how is it that you have come to enjoy hope and peace and joy and gratitude? Well, you just did what Jesus said to do. He said you have to believe him. That's John 3:16. It's at all the football games. Wasn't it the football game yesterday? How many of you went to the football game yesterday? Oh, wait a minute. You did? Okay. How'd they do? Yeah, they did okay, right? 68-0. That's fair. Undoubtedly at the football games, though, somebody holds up the sign, John 3:16. Yeah, Jesus said we have to believe him. Jesus said we have to repent. That's Luke 13:3. We didn't make this up. Jesus is the one who demands that. And Jesus is the one that said we have to confess his name before. That's Matthew 10:32 and 33. That's not me talking, that's Jesus. And Jesus is the one who told us we have to be baptized. That's Matthew 28:18 through 20. Go make disciples. Yes, sir. How do we do that? Well, you baptize them in the name of the Father, the Son, and Holy Spirit, and teach them to observe everything that I've commanded you. Okay. That's what we have to do, because that's what Jesus said to do. Now, you do what Jesus said to do, and he gives you a story to tell. You begin to live a whole new chapter. He writes wonderful new chapters in your story of faith. You just do what Jesus said. And he gives you a story to tell about his grace and how he has had mercy on you. Don't ever forget that. Don't ever forget that. And don't ever forget that your story really isn't about you. It's a story about Jesus and how he has had mercy on you. And when you tell that story, people begin to understand that what he did for you, he'll do for them. So never, ever, ever stop telling despairing people the story about Jesus and how he has had mercy on you. We're going to sing an invitation song and give you an opportunity. If you haven't yet done what Jesus said to do, you have the opportunity to do that today, and you can begin to experience the grace of God and all that he has done in having mercy on you. If you've obeyed the gospel in the past, though, you've been baptized for the forgiveness of your sins and raised to walk in newness of life, but you've forgotten, and you kind of thought you weren't that bad a guy to start with, and you really haven't been living for him. You need to think more carefully about your time BC and what Jesus did and how he rescued you. And you need to be able to tell your story, and you need to remember how he has had mercy on you. If there's anything that we can do to help you in your journey of faith, we're going to give you an opportunity to come down the front. We'll meet you, we'll help you, we'll do anything we can to help you take one more step in your growth of faith life with Jesus. If we can help, please do it now while we stand together and sing the invitation song.